The forest sky burned red with falling ships as the war reached their hidden world at last. Flames raced through the tall alien trees, and the peaceful air that once echoed with birdsong now roared with screams and metal. She crouched low in the moss with her beast beside her, heart pounding like a drum in her chest. The ancient warrior tribes had always said this place would be safe, but they were wrong. She wasn't born to run. She was bred for battle. But today, she was wounded, and so was the creature that had fought at her side for years. His fur was matted with blood, and his growl had lost its thunder. She looked into his glowing yellow eyes and felt something. She never thought possible fear, not fear of death. Fear of failing him. The humans had arrived without warning, crashing into the conflict between her people and the Steel invaders. At first, they were seen as another threat. But then they began pushing back the machines with strange tactics and brutal strength. No one could understand why they fought like they had nothing to lose. But she had seen one of them fighting once with his bare hands, laughing through fire. She remembered that face clearly, though she had only seen it for a few seconds before. Vanishing into the wild, her mission was to defend the sacred tree core. She never expected the machines to find it first. They came with burning drones, digging claws, and cold orders. Her squad fought until none stood. Her beast, her only companion, fought beside her until his legs snapped and he collapsed beside her in the thorns. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Not until now, with no more enemies to fight and no one left to save. The war had taken everything. Her sisters, her command, her pride. And now it would take her last breath. She didn't mind dying. But she hated the thought of him dying too. This loyal beast who had never spoken a word, but had always understood her better than anyone else. She rested her bloodied hand on his thick fur and leaned down beside him, shielding his body with hers as the machines moved through the woods again. She closed her eyes and whispered a soft chant from her childhood. Not a battle prayer, a farewell song. The kind sung by moonlight when a warrior passed. But before the final note left her lips, something warm gripped her wrist. She gasped and opened her eyes. Fingers, human fingers. Real and warm and trembling. Slightly not in fear, but urgency. A figure loomed above her in broken armor and muddy gear. His voice came through the smoke with a calmness that felt almost cruel. "Don't move. I've got you." She didn't understand the words, but the tone struck something in her chest. His hands were already on the beast too, checking the injury with the careful hands of someone who had seen too many wounds before. He wasn't afraid of her claws or the blood or the teeth. He looked at them both like they mattered. Like they were more than dying animals in the dirt. Her beast growled weakly, but didn't attack. That told her everything she needed to know. If the beast trusted him, then she would give him one breath, one moment. She forced her voice out past cracked lips and asked in her native tongue, "Why?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took out something from his pouch, a glowing patch, shaped like a seal, and pressed it gently against the beast's wound. The blue light shimmered and steam rose as the healing began. She had never seen such a thing. She had never imagined it could be used not for a soldier, but for a creature. Then he looked at her and finally spoke, slow and clear, as if he hoped she'd feel the meaning even if she didn't know the words. No one left behind. She didn't know if it was mercy or madness, but in that moment, as her beast whimpered softly and the pain faded just a little, she felt something strange rise in her chest. Not rage, not despair, not even vengeance. It was something lighter, softer, and terribly dangerous for someone like her. She felt hope. Asterisk. The wind carried the scent of burning roots and rusted metal through the forest. Her ears twitched at every crack of a branch or hiss of steam. The human was still beside her, kneeling with one hand on the beast's wound, as if guarding it with the weight of his body. His breath was heavy, but steady. The way he moved showed He had fought hard, bled recently, and yet refused to fall. It was not courage that held him up. It was something deeper, something buried in the way he looked at her without blinking. She kept her blade close, even as her beast whimpered less. The glowing patch had done more than seal the flesh. It had slowed the infection too. That wasn't possible with her tribe's tech. Only healers from the royal caste carried such tools. This man had no royal colors, no rank sigils, and no escort. Just a broken rifle and bloody hands. Yet he knelt with the calm of a prince and the stubbornness of a wild ox. She whispered a soft command and her beast raised his head slightly. The beast licked her wrist, a sign of strength returning. Her heart sank in relief. She turned to the human, narrowing her eyes. "You shouldn't be here," she said in broken common. He nodded slowly, as if he'd heard that 1,000 times. "And still stayed anyway." "I know," he answered, then turned his eyes toward the treetops. "But I heard someone crying." His voice cracked on the last word. Not from sadness, from memory. She didn't know who he'd lost. But someone had carved pain into his bones long before today. He pulled out a small cube and set it between them. A flicker of light sparked, and a tiny flame rose from it. Fire was sacred in her culture, a symbol of rebirth and truth. Most outsiders never knew that. Yet here he was, setting fire between them not for warmth, but to show he meant no harm. She reached forward and touched the heat. It didn't burn. It comforted. They sat in silence for a while. Not because they had nothing to say, but because silence said more. The forest around them crackled with distant threats, but within that small circle, there was peace. Her beast curled beside her again, no longer growling. Just watching the human with golden eyes that no longer saw him as prey. She studied the scars across his arms. Old ones. Deep. The kind only earned from protecting someone else. He had no armor on his chest, only old straps and leather worn through years of use. His hair was a mess of ash and sweat. His eyes were not the kind you found in soldiers. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much and still wanted to protect one more life. He offered her a water pouch. She didn't move, not out of pride, but instinct. Then he drank first before handing it again. That act, simple as it was, shattered the last wall in her heart. She took it and drank. Not much, just enough to remember what it felt like to trust. "I was looking for survivors," he said. "Didn't think I'd find a warrior and a monster cuddling in a crater." She didn't understand all the words, but the way he smiled made her lips twitch in response. Not quite a smile, but not a frown either. He turned the cube higher and the flame brightened, lighting the carved lines on her armor. His eyes lingered on the symbols of her fallen clan. He didn't ask about them. He simply nodded once, as if to honor the weight they carried. That, more than any words, made her shoulders relax. "What do you call him?" he asked, nodding. At the beast, she blinked. No one had ever asked that before. Not even her own kind. He was just beast to most. But in her heart, he had always had a name, one she never said aloud. Until now. "Varric," she said, placing her hand gently on the creature's head. The beast gave a soft sound, almost like approval. The human whispered it once, like it was sacred. Then he looked at her again. "And you?" he asked. Her name caught in her throat. But then she spoke it, for the first time in front of a human. And somehow, it didn't feel like giving something away. It felt like sharing a piece of the world that was still hers. "Asha," she said. Asha stood slowly, her legs stiff from the blood loss and the cold earth. Her beast, Varric, rose beside her with effort, shaking his fur as bits of dirt and leaf clung to him. The human, still crouched by the flame, didn't react with fear or surprise. He simply watched them like he had expected this moment to come. That puzzled her. Most outsiders flinched when a beast moved. But not this one. The fire in the small cube continued to burn. It hummed softly, a quiet rhythm that seemed to echo the pulsing in her veins. She kept her hand near her blade, not to strike, but out of habit. Her body had known too many betrayals to ever rest completely. Yet something inside her had begun to shift. She didn't feel hunted anymore. She felt seen. The man packed up the cube and stood. His joints cracked and his breath caught for a second. He had injuries he hadn't shown. She noticed the tightness in his movement, the small wince when he rolled his shoulder. Still, he didn't complain or ask for help. That told her more than his words ever could. He turned toward the east, toward the shattered path where her outpost once stood. Her tribe was gone, burned in the first wave. She had watched it fall from the cliffs, helpless, held back by orders that came too late. The trees had carried their ashes far, and now the soil bore their names. "I need to reach the crash site," he said, pointing past the ridge. "There might be others trapped." She tilted her head slightly. Why would he care? Why keep fighting when there was no one left to lead him? That question stayed in her mind like a stone in her boot. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she looked at Varric, then nodded once. The beast moved ahead, his steps slow but focused. The human followed, never rushing her, never trying to lead. It was strange. He was not like her commanders or her enemies. He was something else. Something uncertain and real. The woods thickened as they walked. Sunlight cracked through the leaves, in sharp lines, lighting the path like a map. The silence between them grew comfortable. Every few steps, he'd glance back at her or whisper something calming to Varric. The beast didn't respond, but he no longer growled. That was its own answer. At the edge of the ridge, they stopped. Below was a clearing filled with wreckage, metal limbs, snapped wings, broken signal dishes. Smoke curled up in lazy spirals, no signs of movement. No bodies, no life. But she saw something he didn't. Tracks, drag marks in the soil. Someone had survived and crawled away from the flames. "There," she said, pointing to the trail. The human squinted, then nodded with a quiet breath. They moved together, no longer strangers, no longer enemies. Just two shapes among the ruins of a dead forest, pulled by the same silent promise of survival. The trail led through broken trees and scorched vines. They found signs of movement, scraps of cloth, footprints, shattered rations. She crouched beside a large root and brushed away ash to reveal a blood smear. Still fresh. The person they were chasing was alive, but barely. The human pulled a scanner from his side. It blinked red twice, then flashed blue. His eyes widened. He ran forward with sudden speed, and Asha followed without question. Her instincts should have screamed to be cautious, but something stronger moved her legs. Trust. They found her slumped against a fallen pod. A young girl, human, no older than a child. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. The man fell beside her, hands trembling as he checked her pulse. "She's my sister," he whispered. "I thought she was on another ship." He looked like someone who had just seen a ghost breathe again. Asha stepped back, letting him hold the girl. She watched the way his eyes filled with fire and pain and relief all at once. This was why he hadn't given up. Why he had risked everything in enemy territory, not for a mission, not for orders. For her. Varric lay beside Asha, his large body curled near her feet. She reached down and stroked his head, whispering the old warrior vow under her breath. "Protect what remains." The words felt heavier now, more real, more personal. The man looked up at her. "I owe you," he said. She shook her head once. Firmly. "You don't owe," she replied. Then, without knowing why, she added, "But we are not finished yet." The forest had turned quiet again, but not peaceful. The smoke still hung low over the trees, and the air smelled like melted metal and broken roots. The human carried the injured girl on his back, her arms dangling weakly around his neck. His steps were uneven now, heavier with each mile, but he didn't complain. Asha walked beside him with Varric keeping watch ahead. None of them spoke, yet each of them knew they couldn't stop. Asha could see his shoulders trembling. He had used most of his strength already, and the weight of the girl pushed him closer to collapse. She could have offered to carry the child, but something in the way he held her made her stay silent. He needed this. Carrying her wasn't just about survival. It was about making sure he didn't break. They reached a shallow stream cutting through the woods. The water shimmered with strange colors from the wreckage nearby, but it was still cool and clear. Asha crouched to drink first, then signaled him it was safe. He sat beside the stream and gently lowered the girl, cupping water in his hands to wet her dry lips. His care was slow, focused, desperate. Asha took a moment to study the horizon. There were no machines now. No whirring claws or metal beasts tearing trees apart. But silence was a liar. She knew the scouts would return. Drones never stayed gone for long. They would need shelter soon. Somewhere hidden. Somewhere safe enough to let the girl rest. Varric lifted his nose and sniffed the wind. A low growl formed deep in his throat. Asha tensed and turned west toward the shadowed hills. Something was coming. Not machines, not metal. This was different, wild. Her heart quickened. She looked at the human and saw that he had already grabbed his broken rifle and was shielding the girl with his body. From the trees came two shapes. Not enemies, not allies either. Tribal raiders. Not from her clan, strangers. Alien skin marked with ash and war paint. One carried a spear with bones tied along the shaft. The other had a blade carved from volcanic glass. They didn't speak, just stared. Their eyes locked on the girl. Asha stepped in front of them, her body between the strangers and the child. She didn't draw her weapon, not yet, but her stance was clear. She would not let them pass. One of the raiders clicked his tongue and gestured toward the human. His eyes narrowed. His voice was rough. "Outsider, weak, give him to us." Asha didn't move. The human rose slowly, still shielding the girl. "We're not here for trouble," he said. They didn't understand him, but they understood his tone. Defiance echoed in his voice. That was enough. The second raider raised his weapon and stepped forward. Asha drew her blade without blinking. The air between them tightened. Then Varric stepped forward with a growl that shook the trees. His fur bristled, and his eyes glowed with fire. The raiders hesitated. They looked at the beast, then at Asha, then at the human standing tall even. While bleeding, something shifted. The lead raider grunted, lowered his weapon, and stepped back. They vanished into the trees as quickly as they came. Asha waited several moments before lowering her sword. She didn't look at the human, but she could feel his eyes on her. "They feared him," he said quietly, nodding toward Varric. Asha touched the beast's head and whispered, "They should." They followed the stream until it curved into a hidden cave behind a veil of vines. It wasn't much, but it was dry and defensible. Asha cleaned the wounds of the girl with careful hands. The human started a small fire and set a beacon stone nearby, just in case others might still be out there. Hope was a dangerous thing, but he wasn't ready to let it go. Night came quickly. Stars blinked above like distant eyes. The human sat beside his sister, her breathing now steady but shallow. Asha sat across from him, Varric between them, snoring softly. The fire crackled. Finally the man spoke again. "Thank you," he said. Asha didn't answer right away. Then she said the words she hadn't said in years. "You are not alone." The cave grew cold as the night deepened. Wind whispered through cracks in the stone, carrying the scent of ash and something older. Asha barely slept, her hand always resting near her blade, her senses sharp. She had learned long ago that even silence could be deadly. But in this silence, something else lived. Not danger, not sorrow. Something unfamiliar and still forming in her chest. The human had finally drifted into sleep, holding his sister's hand. His body trembled with exhaustion. His breaths came slowly, unevenly. He had used everything he had to protect her. Asha watched him for a long time. Not because she didn't trust him, but because she couldn't yet understand him. Humans were said to be violent, unpredictable, short-lived. And yet this one burned brighter than any flame she had known. She leaned against Varric, whose massive body gave warmth and a sense of safety no shelter could match. His wounds were healing fast, but his eyes remained open, scanning the cave's mouth. He too had sensed the shift in their journey. They were no longer just survivors. Something more had begun to bind them together, not by command, not by duty, by choice. Morning came with silver light bleeding through the vines. The human stirred first. He sat up slowly, checked his sister's pulse, then looked at Asha. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he reached into his pack and offered her a ration bar. It was stale and cracked, but it was the first food shared between them since their meeting. She took it without a word. After they ate, the human stood and pointed toward the eastern ridge. "If we can reach the old Cum Tower, we might get a signal out," he said. Asha understood only a few words, but she nodded. She knew what a tower meant. A chance, a risk, a goal. And risks were better than waiting for death. They packed quickly. The girl was still too weak to walk. Varric lay down, and to Asha's surprise, allowed the girl to be placed gently across his back. She didn't protest. The beast moved slowly, careful with his steps, as if he knew he carried something precious. It was the first time Asha had ever seen him act that way toward another soul. The path was steep and overgrown. Old machines half buried in vines watched them with dead eyes as they passed. Burnt flags hung from broken branches. Reminders of wars older than this one. Asha remembered those days. She had been a child then, hiding beneath her mother's cloak. As the sky fell, now she walked under that same sky, leading strangers through the ruins of her past. Halfway up the ridge, they heard movement ahead. Asha signaled for silence. Varric crouched low, the girl clinging tightly to his fur. The human raised his broken rifle. Asha moved ahead like shadow, her blade ready. Then she saw them. Survivors, 3 of them. Alien soldiers from a different faction, half-starved and frightened. They were armed, but barely. Their eyes widened at the sight of her. Before anyone could act, the human stepped forward, arms raised. "We don't want trouble," he said. The survivors didn't understand his words, but they saw the child, the beast, and the woman with the drawn blade who hadn't struck. They lowered their weapons, slowly, carefully, and then, for the first time in days, the tension began to melt. One of the aliens, tall and thin with silver skin, spoke in rough dialect. Asha translated. They saw the tower collapse. "But a secondary beacon may still function," the human nodded. That was enough to keep moving. The strangers joined them, limping and leaning on each other. There was no more war between them. Now, only shared breath and the need to survive. The final climb to the signal hill was sharp and narrow. Jagged rocks lined the edges. One wrong step could send someone falling. Asha went first, then Varric, then the human. The girl remained silent, her arms wrapped tightly around Varric's neck. She trusted the beast more than the trail, and the beast moved with slow, steady strength. At the top stood the broken frame of a once tall tower. Its main spire had fallen, but the secondary dish still blinked weakly. The human ran to it, hands shaking as he opened the control box. Sparks flew. He cursed. Asha moved beside him and held the wires steady while he worked. She didn't understand but she understood hands. These were the hands of someone who refused to give up. Finally, a soft hum filled the air. A weak signal pushed through the static. The human didn't smile. He simply breathed and said one word under his breath. Hope. Asterisk. The signal traveled like a whisper through broken skies. The human adjusted the transmitter carefully, guiding it with fingers blackened by dirt and burnt circuits. Asha stood beside him, her eyes scanning the sky, her blade still. Sheathed but close. She didn't know if help would come. She didn't even know who might hear the signal. But the way he looked at the blinking light made her believe someone would. The others gathered around slowly. The silver-skinned alien sat near a boulder, rubbing his injured leg. The two others, one horned and one with copper scales, stood watch facing the western trees. Even they, hardened by war and mistrust, felt something different in the air. A chance, faint as breath, but real enough to hold on to. Varric settled down with the girl still resting on his back. She hadn't spoken since the climb, but her small hand stayed buried in the beast's thick fur. Her chest rose and fell slowly. She was still fighting. Asha knelt beside her and placed a hand on her forehead. Warm, but steady. Stronger than before. The girl was holding on too. The human leaned back and wiped sweat from his face. His lips moved silently, maybe in prayer or memory. She didn't ask what he was thinking. She had learned that humans carried their pain deep, behind quiet eyes and sharp smiles. What mattered was what he chose to do with that pain. And right now he chose to save. A buzzing sound echoed from the trees. Sharp, mechanical. Too familiar. Asha stood instantly, her hand flying to her weapon. The others reacted the same. Drones. They were coming. No longer searching, now hunting. She looked at the human and saw that he had already grabbed his rifle, broken though it was. He didn't ask questions. He just moved. The drones emerged in groups, silver wings slicing the air, red eyes glowing in clusters. They didn't wait. Lasers fired from their frames, burning into the rocks and earth. The survivors scattered, ducking behind. Broken stone and twisted steel. Asha darted toward the hill's edge, taking position behind a fallen pipe. She could hear Varric growling low and steady. The human covered the girl with his body, shielding her as sparks flew around them. One of the copper-scaled survivors threw a shard grenade that tore through two drones mid-air. Shah jumped from cover and struck a third drone with her blade, slicing it clean through. The battle was fast and brutal, but the drones didn't stop. They kept coming, wave after wave, as if the signal had pulled them here. Varric lunged and tackled one of the drones. That had landed too close. His teeth crunched metal as sparks flew from his mouth. Asha fought near him, cutting down anything that came too close. But for everyone they killed, two more followed. The hill would not hold much longer. Then the signal tower gave a sharp pulse. A new light flashed from the beacon stone. Green, not red. Green. The human looked up. His face lit with something she hadn't seen before. Not just hope, recognition. They heard us, he said, shouting over the noise. They're coming. Asha didn't have time to respond. A drone slammed into her side, sending her crashing into the ground. Pain shot through her ribs. Before she could rise, it aimed a laser at her chest, but a blur of motion struck it first. The human tackled it with a wild scream, smashing its head against a rock until it sparked out. He bled from his arm, but didn't stop moving. She grabbed his hand as he pulled her up. Their fingers locked. She didn't let go. Behind them, the sky rumbled with something deeper than wind. Engines, real engines, ships, rescue. The sound of life returning to a place death had claimed. The drones hesitated. Then they turned and fled back into the trees. Something had frightened them. Not just resistance, not just fire, but the roar of ships dropping from orbit, armored and loud, marked with the crest of peacekeepers from the central galaxy core. The signal had worked. Help had arrived. The hill was still burning, but they were no longer alone. Asha looked at the human, his face covered in soot and blood. He smiled, but barely. Then he looked at his sister, still breathing, still alive. And that smile grew stronger. For the first time in many cycles, Asha felt her heart beat for more. Then survival. She felt it beat for something greater than war or tribe. It beat for those who chose to protect without needing to conquer. And she knew in that moment that the end she had once waited for was no longer the end at all. The sky above the hill burst open with roaring engines as the rescue ships descended. Massive wings of silver and white pushed through clouds of smoke, stirring the trees below. Lights blinked across their hulls, and banners of peacekeeper emblems unfolded along their sides. For a moment, it looked like the stars themselves had come down to protect what little remained. The drones vanished into the woods, like shadows before the sun. Their retreat was sudden, as if the signal had triggered a warning deep in their programming. The survivors on the hill didn't cheer. They didn't move. They simply stood in silence, unsure if this moment was real. Asha's hand remained tightly around the human's wrist, her heart still racing with the memory of almost dying again. The girl stirred on Varroc's back. Her fingers twitched, her lips parted. A soft sound escaped her throat, a whisper, no louder than the wind. "Brother." The human dropped to his knees, tears streaking through the soot on his face. He held her close, pressing his forehead to hers. She was alive, weak but alive. And her voice had returned just in time to witness their rescue. A group of armored medics rushed down the slope, carrying stretchers and gear. They spoke into headsets and scanned the wounded quickly. Asha moved aside as one of them reached for the girl. The human nodded once, allowing them to take her gently into their care. Varroc growled low but stepped back without command. Even the beast understood she would be safe now. One of the officers approached Asha and bowed his head slightly. His translator flickered before speaking. "We received your distress. Reinforcements are sweeping the nearby sectors. You are no longer under threat." His words were practiced official, but his eyes carried something honest. Respect. She nodded in return but didn't speak. Her voice had no place in this moment. Instead, she walked to Varroc's side and placed a hand on his thick fur. The hilltop was being filled with movement now, soldiers directing others, medical staff treating burns, survivors offering names and ranks. Yet she felt strangely distant from it all. The human stood beside her again, no longer shaking. He had not removed his helmet, but his expression was softer now, grateful, changed. "They'll take her to the main ship," he said. "She'll make it." Asha looked up at him and simply nodded. There were no words needed to understand what that meant. As the rescuers cleared the area, the silver-skinned survivor approached Asha one last time. He bowed deeply. "You held the line," he said in her tongue. "You protected more than your own." Then he turned and followed the others toward the ship without waiting for a reply. She watched him disappear into the trees with quiet respect. One of the command shuttles opened nearby. A voice called out names, designations, and landing zones. The human looked toward it, then turned back to her. "I have to go with her," he said, "but I'll be back." Asha raised an eyebrow slightly. "Back here?" she asked. He smiled. "Back to where you are." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal badge. It was scorched and scratched but bore the mark of Earth's Third Fleet. He placed it in her hand and curled her fingers around it. "So you'll know I meant it," he said. She didn't open her hand. She didn't look at the symbol. She just closed her fist and met his eyes. Then he stepped away and joined the medics loading his sister onto the transport. She looked back once, eyes wide and tired but smiling. Asha felt something crack deep inside her. Not pain, not sorrow, something warmer. Something that scared her more than any drone or war ever could. As the ship engines roared to life, Asha stood still. Varroc pressed against her side, his breath calm. She looked to the trees, the wounded ground, the broken tower behind her, all reminders of what had been lost. But in her hand, she now carried a mark of what had been found, the ship rose into. The sky, flames beneath it flickering like fading stars. She watched it until it vanished behind the clouds. And even then, she kept staring, as if she could still feel its warmth through the cold wind rising again. She did not cry, but she did not harden either. Asterisk days passed after the rescue, though to Asha, time felt strange now. The forest no longer burned, but the scars of war remained across the land. The peacekeepers had secured the area and begun rebuilding the damaged outposts. Survivors were being processed, reunited, or sent to recovery zones. Yet Asha remained, near the ruins of the old tower, not ready to leave the place where everything had changed. She spent her nights by the same fire, with Varric at her side, watching the skies. Ships still passed overhead, dropping supplies or scanning for remaining threats. But no danger came. And still, no word from the human who had walked into her world like fire and left like wind. She told herself it didn't matter. That she did indeed promises. But each night, her fingers held the badge he gave her tighter. One morning, a small drone floated down beside her and released a sealed container. It bore his name. Her heart jumped, but she waited until she was alone to open it. Inside, there was a single recording and a folded cloth. The recording played his voice steady, clear, and unmistakably human. If you're hearing this, it means I made it back to Earth. My sister's safe. She keeps asking about the warrior. Girl with the Volf. I told her you were more than that. His voice paused for a moment before continuing. I don't know if I'll be allowed to return. Maybe politics will get in the way. Maybe the galaxy will forget what we did. But I won't. And if the day ever comes when you need someone to fight beside you again, light the fire. I'll come. She played the message 3 times that night. Then she folded the cloth. It was a scarf, human-made, worn and patched. But on one end was stitched her name, written in human letters beside his. She held it close to her chest, and for the first time in cycles, she allowed herself to sleep without fear. The seasons shifted. Forests began to heal. Her people, once thought scattered or dead, sent word from nearby zones. A new council had begun to form, not one based on bloodlines or warrior ranks, but unity. Survivors of different tribes gathered, and they asked Asha to lead them, not because of her name, but because of the choices she had made. She refused at first. She was not a leader. She was a blade, a shadow, but they insisted. And so she stood one morning before them, Varric at her side, and raised her voice for peace instead of war. She spoke of the human who had risked everything for a life that wasn't his. She told them what it meant to protect not because of orders, but because of heart. In time, they built a new stronghold not far from the old tower. It wasn't grand. It wasn't meant to be. But it stood as a place where warriors could rest, where beasts could heal, and where the fire at its center never went out. A signal flame was kept burning above it, just in case he ever returned. One quiet evening, Asha walked alone through the forest trails. Varric followed her slowly, older now, but still proud. The wind was cool, and the air carried no scent of fire or fear. Just the song of leaves and distant rivers. She came to the hill where it had all started. The hill where the girl had whispered. The hill where the man had smiled through blood. She knelt and placed a small stone at the top of the hill. On it, she carved 2 symbols, one of her people, and one from Earth. She said no words. None were needed. The sky turned golden above her as the sun dipped low. Then, far off in the clouds, a distant sound stirred her senses. A ship broke through the sky, descending fast, guided by light. It bore no banners, no markings, but her heart knew it before her eyes did. She stood slowly, her hand resting on Varric's head. The beast gave a soft growl, not of warning, but of welcome. The ship touched down in the clearing, and its doors opened wide, and from within, he stepped out, wearing a new uniform and the same fire in his eyes. She didn't run to him. She waited. As he walked to her, silent and sure, until they stood face to face once more. Then without a word, she reached out and placed his badge back in his hand, and smiled.